Hello, and welcome to this webinar on freeing developers to develop Oracle Database 23c free developer release. So today we are here to understand which is the potential of this release and the possibility that you can have deploying an application and using the Oracle Database 23c as a platform for your data. I think it's again a proof of the commitment that Oracle is having for the developer community. So let's have an interesting walk through the future that we launched recently. If you want to interact with us, we have an Slack public workspace, Oracle Developer Public Workspace. We encourage you to join us for a conversation during the event, but especially after the event, where you can be in engagement with our panelists and our expert or product expert. You can join with the QR code if you want, or there is the bit link or the Devrel_Slack, and you need to search for the dedicated channel webinar 23c developer release. So I'm going to post this into the chat, so you will have also the direct link pretty soon. But now is the moment to start. I want to welcome Chris Exon, the JD of SQL, in my opinion. So literally, he will give you all the details, and I encourage you to raise questions using also the Q&A here on Zoom or the chat, and we will check the question at the end of the session after the demo. So over to you, Chris, and welcome again, everybody.
Hey, that's great. Thank you, Ettore. So it's great to see you all this morning. It's glad to be here, and we'll have some fun talking about what's in 23c. But first, we'll start off with a query or something. Many of you probably written a query something like this at some point. We've got a group by. You run it, and you run into the not a group by expression. You're just like, oh, well, what's the problem here? There's some issue. Let's hunt around. Oh, well, if we look. Actual game length, that column, it's not in an aggregate. We haven't summed or counted it or something, and it's not in the group by. So we've got an error here. So let's fix that. Let's put it in a sum. So job done, everything's fine. So we're going to work now, right? Well, we run the query again, and we get another error, right? The problem here is actual game length is actually an interval data type, not a number. And this is something which historically you couldn't use in sums and averages. So at this point, you're going, okay, well, why don't we try and filter out these kind of invalid data types like intervals? So you might need to remove this. So we don't want to sum that up. So let's create a function. Let's check if something is a number and make it a Boolean function. Is it true or false? And cast something to a number. And then we can try and use that in our SQL statement, right? And, I'm sure at this point, you're all going to know what the problem here is. That doesn't work either, right? Boolean was not a data type that was supported in Oracle SQL. You could use it in PL SQL, but not Oracle SQL. So at this point, you're kind of probably losing the plot a little bit and kind of going, why won't you just work? I'm just trying to write some simple query here. The whole thing's falling over in a big heap. What's going on here? So there's a lot of kind of tiny frustrations that you could have when working with Oracle Database. And we wanted to address these in 23c, which we're calling App Simple. The idea here is we want to make it completely simple to develop applications. And we think this really delivers on our vision to make it possible for you to build any apps or any analytics on any data at any scale. And this is something we started back in the 19C timeframe with Autonomous Database. So about 4 years ago now, we launched Autonomous Database, which made it completely simple for you to actually run database applications. We managed the patching, the backup, and so on and so forth. We added features like automatic indexing to analyze your workload and automatically create the workloads, the indexes for you. So we built that to make it easy and simple to actually manage the applications. And we've extended this by making it simply complete in terms of functionality. And so whatever data type you want to support, want to store, whether it's classic relational tables, JSON, key value stores, network models, that kind of thing, you can store them all in Oracle database and access them using Oracle SQL. So this is something we feel delivers on our vision to make it completely simple to run applications and simply complete in terms of functionality. And there's quite a lot of things in 23C which we feel delivers on this simply complete promise. So there's a lot of big headline features. We've got JSON relational duality, which allows you to kind of map your relational tables to JSON documents and then actually interact with those JSON documents and have a transparent, seamless transition to them. SQL PGQ, graph queries. So you can now run those natively in the database with SQL extensions. This is actually now part of the SQL standard. So SQL 2023 standard, which is out this year, it's also part of that. So we've built that natively in the databases. Transactional microservices. So if you've got lots of microservices, something like create order might call the actual order microservice, invoice, the payment, so on. There could be several services that it calls. What happens if there's a problem in one of those? It throws an error. How do you roll it all back? So transactional microservices help with that. We've got data usage domains and annotations, which allow you to kind of describe and explain how you're actually going to use your data in your application. If you're a JavaScript developer, actually use that directly in the database. And perhaps most interestingly, and certainly most importantly to me, simple SQL. So this is something that we're going to be looking at a lot today, the simple SQL, because there is a lot of new SQL features in 23C. I've just highlighted a few here. I think there's something like over 300 features in total. We're going to run through a few of them, see them in action, and actually have a kind of live demo of how you can use these and how they make it easier to develop things. So like I say, we think 23C makes it, delivers on this simply complete promise to make it possible to build any applications you want in any way that you want. And to really show our kind of commitment to developers and show that we really have you in mind in terms of building these applications, we've also introduced the Oracle Database 23C free developer release. So this was announced last month, so a few weeks ago. Juan Loaiza announced it, and the idea behind this is it is ahead of the full GA of Oracle Database. So similar to Express Edition, which is limited in terms of resources. So 23C, you get up to 2 CPUs, 12 gigs of data, 2 gigs of RAM, I think. And this is free for you to download and use for whatever you want, right? You can access it and download it now and get started and see what's coming in 23C in the future. So just kind of really show that it is completely free. You can just download it. You don't need an account. If I go to the download page, notice I'm not actually logged in at all. I just need to click the thing and then ta-da, we're done. I can download the RPM. So it's available under the free to use terms and conditions. And we've got the RPM available. There's also Docker image and a VirtualBox image available for those as well. So you can download it, get started, and get up and running however you want here. And as at this point, some of you kind of like going, what, free Oracle Database developer release ahead of the full release? This is a bit different, right? Well, this is very different from Oracle. And this is something that, like I say, we really want to show our commitment to developers to make it easy for you to build applications. The idea here is something for you to get started and learn what's coming, because a lot of the things that you can't do in free are things like RAC, high availability features, which aren't really of interest to developers generally. So you can get this, learn what's here in SQL, and get started and get up and running. As I said, this is something, a very new departure and a new way of working for Oracle Database. And a lot of the analysts have noticed this. We've got RedMonk saying that it's really showing that Oracle is committed to our developers and actually getting started and up and running. See, there's a question is saying, is it available as a Windows installer? So there's not a native Windows installer available yet. However, you can use VirtualBox. If you've got VirtualBox on Windows, you can download that VirtualBox image and get up and running there. So if you're using Windows, get VirtualBox and use it that way. That's actually what I'm doing today, right? I'm using Windows here and I'm running it on Windows here. So that's enough kind of preamble and background. I think we actually want to get down to what's going on here and actually see it in action, right? So let's imagine we're building a little application, and we use the example of like a sporting league or games between teams. So this could be something like football, cricket, rugby, hockey, whatever, anything where there are two teams and they're playing a game. And what we're going to do is we'll build the schema and we'll supply some data, and we'll just see how what's new in 23C can make this just easier to actually manage and use. So we're only going to have three entities, three tables in this. Obviously, we've got teams who are going to play the games. Each of those has a location, so their home stadium, their home pitch, where they are based. And we've got the games themselves, which is between a home and away team. So each game has two teams, and the game itself will also have a foreign key back to the locations, because it might be at a different place than the home team stadium, right? Maybe tournaments, things like that. So that's a quick overview. Let's get up and get started and actually see this in action. All right, so to start off with, I'm just going to kind of reset everything. So I got my league owner and my reporting user. First thing to notice here is this if exists clause. So thing to note with this is it's saying if it exists, remove it. If it doesn't, just say that user does not exist. It is no longer present. So notice I'm dropping my league owner. I keep doing it. I do not get an error because that user is not present. It's saying after this command is complete, the user is gone. Okay, so we've got our owner, which is going to have the tables, and our reporting user, which will want to give select privileges on so it can actually do some reports and run some queries on them. All right, so we've dropped them. Let's create them back again. And my league owner, I'm going to use this no authentication clause. So this has actually been around a little while. Back in 18C, we introduced this. This means that the league owner has no password. There is no way to connect directly as the league owner. And you can see I'm using the create if not exist clause. So if I run this multiple times, again, we get no error. So you might go, okay, that's nice. We've created this league owner with no authentication. How do we actually connect to it and create some tables, right? Well, what I'm going to do is create a proxy user, an admin user. So this could be general admin user, could be your deployment user, something like that. It's just got the create session privilege. We've done that, and we'll give it the ability to connect through the league owner. So what this means is we can connect as the league owner using the credentials we have here. We do that. Next, we actually need to give league owner the ability to create objects, create table, create view, create procedure, that kind of thing. We've introduced a new DB developer role to grant all these basic privileges for you, the general things you'll need when creating objects. So as I said, this includes pretty much all the basic create privileges you need to actually make tables and so on. And we need to give it some table space privilege so we can store some data as well. Then I will also create the reporting user. We'll come back to the reporting user a bit later. Right now, I'm just giving it create session. All right, so having created that, we now actually want to go and create the tables. So I'm going to connect as the proxy user. So I connect as my proxy user here. Come on, back over here. So I connect as my proxy user. Thing to note here is we've now got the ability to do select without a from clause. We no longer need our from dual here. So we can see we are connected as the league owner, but we are using the admin. Our proxy user is admin user. Now, at this point, just to reassure you, dual still exists. Dual will still continue to exist, probably forever, right? It is just that it is no longer necessary. So this is useful when we're just selecting expressions. functions and things like that. Okay, so we're connected. Again, just kind of show, this is a completely new schema, just kind of show we can do this drop if exists. There's nothing in here, so we're going to get no errors there. Now, first thing I want to do is I want to create some domains. So these are usage domains and explain, like I say, how the data is going to be used. And what I'm going to do is I've got a surrogate key. So we've got our sequence assigned primary keys. They're going to be mandatory integers. So I can create this domain, and it's an integer that's not null. It's got an annotation to mark it as a primary key. I'll come back to the annotations a bit later, so keep that in mind. So let's create that surrogate domain. Then we've got the scores themselves, how many goals, points, runs, whatever each team has. Again, those are integers. I'm going to give those a default value as well, and a check constraint. I'm sure there's a game that exists that allows negative points for teams, but I'm not familiar with one, or at least not off the top of my head. You can't have negative goals in football, for example. So we're going to have, make sure that's greater than 0. I'm also going to add an order expression. So by default, when you sort things, they sort low to high for goals, runs, that kind of thing. Quite often, the team that has the most points, most high score is the winner. So we want to sort high to low. So we can do that as well. I'll come back to that order expression a bit later. And then we want to say the game length, how long it is. So that is an interval, so a duration here. And we can't have 0 length or negative length durations. So we've got check constraint, and we've got a display expression to convert those intervals into something a bit more meaningful, to minutes. So we can then use these domains when defining our tables. So let's go and let's start creating our tables. We'll start off with our locations table. And you see we've got our create if not exists, and we've got our surrogate ID using that domain. So it's going to be our not null integer. So we create that table, and let's just kind of describe it. We can see we've got our 2 columns there. Now notice create if not exists. This means if I rerun it, I won't get an error, but it is create if not exists, not create or replace. Okay. If I create the table again, but with a completely different definition, it does not change the table, right? Notice I'll run that again. We've still got the same definition. So I'll just prove it, run that a few times. It doesn't change the definition. It just says this table does exist. So you might want to be a bit careful with this create if not exists clause, if you're going to have changing definitions and things like that. Okay, so we've got our locations table. Next, we want our teams. And again, we've got our domain. So we saw we could use it basically as the data type. You can also use it to kind of extend or decorate the data type. So we can actually use the integer and use the domain with the surrogate ID. The data type for the domain here does have to be compatible with whatever data type you define here. Obviously, I couldn't make this a date or something like that and then use a domain like this. But so there's 2 ways of kind of defining it here. So we can create our teams, and we've got some more annotations as well. And then we've got the games. So we've got our home team, away team. They've got foreign keys. We're going to annotate them, say they're foreign keys. They're part of the primary key, start time, length. Again, we've got our game duration, which uses our domains again, our scores and so on. So we'll create that table. So at this point, let's just have a look at the columns and types in our table and see what's actually going on here. So we can view what we've got. And you can see we've got our columns, and the ones with a domain, we have a domain name associated with them. So we've got our duration, and the check constraint we had in that domain has been applied to those columns. So we can see we've got that. Now at this point, the eagle-eyed among you will have noticed that I defined a domain for the scores, but I didn't actually use it in the table definition. So, oops, okay, we need to kind of add this after the fact. And actually, this is kind of be a general situation for most of us when you upgrade to 23C, right? You've got all these schema with lots of tables and columns. You want to create these domains. How do we actually apply them to the columns we've got already? Well, it's super easy. We just do this modify add domain. So we'll just pin this. We'll add the domain for the home and away, and if we run the query again, you'll see that not only have we got the domain applied to it, but it is also added that default and the constraint. So just to kind of show what we had before, there was no default, there was no constraint, and the values were optional. By applying the domain, we've applied the constraint, the default, and the not null constraint to those columns. So if you want to kind of like roll out this change to multiple columns when you upgrade to 23C, you can do so. So we've got a centralized single point of way to define these domains and what they are. Okay, so we've got our domains. I said I would come back to the annotations. You notice we had that annotations clause. And what these are key and optional value pairs. So you can just give metadata about what these objects are. Okay, and we can see, we can look at the annotations usage. We'll get those up and we can see what they are. So we can use the display name. And then this is something, I mean, it's kind of entirely up to you what you want to use them for. But the idea here is a centralized place for your application to get metadata for whatever purpose it might be useful. So we might want to have standardized names for displaying these columns. So those are our display names. Give a nice easy place to see what the foreign and primary keys are and things like that. So they are optional name value pairs. As you can see, I've made some to declare them as foreign keys so we can see what they are. But it's up to you. You can do what you want them. And there's someone, I see someone was saying, can we see these as advanced comments? And it's like, yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it. People said, why don't we just use comments, right? You know, I could have done something like this in the past, added comment on the column. But I mean, this works, but it is a bit fiddly to deal with. What if we've got multiple different values that we want to say here? You know, with this team ID, we add the primary key annotation and the display annotation as well. What do we, I mean, I guess we could put a JSON document in here or something like that, but you've got to kind of agree and standardize on an approach. With annotations, it's kind of built in that you can have these separate value pairs. Another thing as well, it also applies to a much wider range of object types. So those of you who like comments will have known that for a long time, if you've got an index and you try and create an index on it, it just don't work. As I say, it throws an error because they weren't valid. However, annotations can be applied to objects as well. So they serve a very similar purpose to comments, but as I say, they are more powerful, they support more object types, and they are a series of name value pairs. So you've got more freedom and flexibility to use them and do what you want. And you see someone saying how to access created annotations. It's these annotations usage views, so you can see what's going on there. Okay, let's just close those off. All right then, so we've created our tables. Let's now actually load some data in. So first up, we need to load in our stadiums, our locations, and I've got multiple different locations I want to load. In the past, we'd have had to have separate insert statements. Well, there were other ways, but generally would have done it with separate inserts. 23C, we've got the 23 value table values constructor. So what you can see, we're just kind of listing them out here, and this will load all 6 rows in one pass. Those of you who've heard me speak before about saying do as much work as you can in one SQL statement, here we're doing one SQL statement to load all 6 rows. So we've loaded our locations in. Let's load the teams in as well. I'm doing a slightly different version of the values clause. I mean, I could have just done the insert values as well. I'm just making a point here is that you can use the values clause to generate data, you know, return a table, which is a query. In reality, I probably would have just done an insert values before. I'm doing an insert select values, just kind of demonstrate that you can use this to run a query as well, to generate data on their fly. So we've got our teams in there, and I'm just going to load in some match details as well. So let's just commit that, and we can see we've got some games loaded in. So let's come back to our domains. We had our scheduled game length, which is an interval, and the format for this is fixed. You can to-char it, but you can't actually specify formats for it. And it's not too obvious what this is here. You know, it's days, hours, minutes, seconds. we might want to get this in something more usable, just in minutes, for example. You remember on that domain we had for this column, I defined a domain display expression. So we can activate that with domain display. We pass that column to it, and it formats that value as we want it. So we get the number of minutes. So this can be really useful, as I say, if we want to standardize how things actually appear in the application. So we're formatting minutes here, formatting numbers, things like that, and see how they look and actually work in practice. So we've got our domain display. So move on, and let's enter some results. Now, as you remember, start off with, I didn't apply the domain for the scores to the columns, and then one added it afterwards, and that had the check constraint. So if we do that, we can see we do get check constraint error, but it is actually a different error number than we had before because it is coming from the domain. So it's due to the domain constraint, okay? So that is saying that is why we can't have negative values in there. So let's load in some actual values and just save it. And what I want to do is run a query to actually get the total playtime each month. So I'll group by. So those of you who are paying attention might recall this looks very, very similar to the query I had in that very first slide, 10, 15 minutes ago, whatever, something like that. So let's run this query, and unsurprisingly, we'll get an error. But what might surprise you is that the error is a lot more useful, a lot more interesting. Rather than just not a group by, we are now told actual game length, this column, it's not in the group by, it's not summed or averaged, and the error tells us that. So you're not like hunting around quite so much to find out what the problem here is. So this is something else that you'll notice in 23C and actually ongoing in future releases. We are working hard to make these error messages much more usable, much more understandable out of the box, so you can get more guidance and direction on what's going on here. Now, you won't see this on all error messages day one. As soon as we upgrade to 23C, I mean, there's thousands and thousands of error messages. We are working through them, so this is something you'll see gradually roll out in future releases. But hopefully, this will make things just easier to manage and understand when they are dealt with. Right, so we need to fix this. We want to sum this up. We want to get the total playtime schedules each month, or the actual not scheduled time, the actual runtime. So we'll make that a sum. And I'm also doing a few other things in this query. So actually, we just go back up here, we'll see we wanted to group by month. So we had our trunk here, and we had to duplicate that expression in the group by. Be kind of nice if you didn't have to do that. Just define it once and then reuse it in the group by. So 23C, we've allowed you to group by alias. So the alias for this expression, you put in the group by clause, and it will use that to actually define the grouping as well. Now we've got our sum of our actual game length. This is an interval, which we couldn't previously aggregate, but in 23C we can. Another tiny kind of small feature in 23 as well is you can now do ceilings and floors on basically all date time values, dates, timestamps, intervals, and so on. So we can round them up and down to whatever units we want here. So we run that and see, voila, the query actually works. Fantastic. So we can see we round it down to the hour or round it up to the minute. So, I mean, it's quite a short, simple query here, but it demonstrates quite a few of these small, simple things in 23C, which just makes it a whole bunch easier, the experience better when it comes to working with Oracle Database. Okay, so let's look at the results. And one of the things I said is we wanted to sort, by default, when you order by values, it's low to high. But of course, with pretty much all sports, the team with the highest score is the winner. So we want to actually change that and sort high to low. So we added a domain order expression. So to activate that, we actually, again, we need, a bit like domain display, we have to have the domain order function. So we run that and we get the low the high to low sorting, I should say. So you can see the highest values are at the top working. So we get 4 down to 0. I've included them in the select clause just to make it kind of clear what's going on here. Generally, you wouldn't do this, right? Generally, you would just put it in the order by, but I think this is useful just to kind of help show the principal what's actually going on here. And again, you might want to do this when debugging or testing or trying things out, figuring out what's going on here. So we can use this domain order expression to define custom sorts for these domains, which can be very useful, particularly if we look at things like multi-column domains where you want to have complex sorting rules, non-standard sorting rules for doing that. All right, let's move on. We've loaded our games in, got some results. Let's say, so Champions United, they're so successful, they've bought themselves a big, massive new stadium, and that's now going to be their new home ground. So let's create a new stadium, and we'll update that team to use that stadium, and we'll just save that. Now, what we want to do is update all the future games for this team to use this new location, right? Well, we're doing it halfway through the season for some reason. Normally, they'd probably wait till the end of the season to do this, but just demonstrate the principle, right? So all the future games for Champions United, Team 1, we want to update to use this new location. And, you know, we could just maybe put this, value directly in an update to the games, but in general, we might not know exactly what it is. We wanted to update the games from the teams table, and we would have had to write a correlated subquery a bit like this and do some filtering. And often you might need to duplicate this subquery in your where clause as an exists or an in to make sure you are only changing the rows that you want to. So we could do this, but it's a bit of a fiddle to write, right? And there's another problem here as well. I say problem, but confusing thing. We're saying we've got 4 rows updated, but what do we know? What are the new values? What were the values before, and what have we changed them to? You know, you see we're moving the games to start an hour later. You know, this team's so successful, they've got their own time slot schedule. How do we know what it was before, and how do we know what it is after the fact? So let's just roll that back. Let's just undo those changes. So in 23C, we've got features to address this. So first up, I'm just going to declare some types so we can collect the changes our updates is going to make. And next, we've got the ability to use direct joins in updates and deletes as well. So we've got our games table, and you see we've got from the teams. So we are joining games to the teams in the query, in the statement itself here. And then we can reference the table we are joining to in the right-hand side of our set clause. So pull those values from what we're getting. Next, in our returning clause, what have we changed the game time from, and what have we changed it to? So in the past, we've had the returning clause in update for as long as I know, as long as I can remember anyway, but you always got the values at the end of the update. What if we want to see the old and the new values? Well, now we've got old and new keywords, so we can see what things have changed and from and to. You can omit those. If you omit it, it defaults to new, which is the current behavior. And we're just going to load those into that array of records that we had before. And we wanted to see what those are. We wanted to loop through an array. We can use this 21C syntax. So I'm getting myself all mixed up and confused. So this is something we've been able to do for a while, you know, for the previously released couple of years now, just easily and simply loop through arrays in PL SQL. Or maybe you don't want to kind of loop through it. Maybe you just want to convert this to JSON to return it to the client, for example. Well, now it's even easier, right? In 23C, the JSON constructor, so this is a new function, has an implicit conversion from all PL/SQL records and array types. So we just pass it in, we just pass in our variable, and it will JSONify it for us. So let's just run this, and we'll see we've got some changes, and then we go up. So I'll start at the top here. You can see this was our loop where we were iterating through our array. There was the 4 rows we changed, and we can see what we've changed from and to. We can see the new times, or we can see the JSON representation of it as well. Names of the attributes here match exactly the names of the attributes in the record. Okay, so they are inferred from that record that we've just generated there. Alrighty then, so we've loaded our data in, and we made some changes, and we've got that all working in. Let's move on. Let's do let's just say let's do some analysis and things like that. Let's say we want to create a function to see if the home team won. And say we've been able to do this in PL/SQL for ages. We just check if the home score is greater than the away score. If it is, then the home team has won. It's true, or we're going to say that's the case. And notice we are returning a Boolean here. As I said, this has been in PL/SQL for, again, as long as I can remember, so 20 plus years, but it has not been in SQL. So if we've got our PL/SQL function here, then it's like, the question is like, well, how do we use it in SQL, right? In the past, you would have always had to write some kind of wrapper function. So I'm doing this with the with clause from 12c. So what, 9 years now, something like that? No, 10 years nearly, actually. You've been able to define functions on the fly in a SQL statement like this, and basically just convert the values from a Boolean to yes, no, 1, 0, whatever you want. And then we can use that function there, get the results. But this is a bit of a fiddle and a bit of a faff. From 23c, Boolean is a native SQL data type. So what this means is we can now use that PL/SQL function directly in our SQL statement. So we don't need to create any of these wrapper functions to convert from Boolean and so on and so forth. So notice I've got the kind of is true thing here. You can also do equals true should you wish to. Either of those work. So we can use Boolean in SQL. And not only can we use it to do Boolean expressions like this, you can actually have Boolean columns in a table. Now, personally, I think generally actually storing Boolean columns, there are some use cases, but they're fairly rare, right? However, I think having Boolean flags for derived from those columns is quite useful. Things like, has the home team won? Is the game complete? Things like that. So we can actually do those. We can create virtual columns, which are Booleans from these expressions. So we can see if the game is finished. We can add those virtual columns to the table. And again, just to show you can select Boolean expressions. This is showing 0 just because I'm on the old version of the client here. 0 is false. You know, n is false as well. So just implicitly converting that to say that is false. So we've got our flags, and then we can get a summary of the games that's finished. So notice with our where clause, because it's a Boolean, we don't need to say whether it equals true or is true or something like that. We can just say is finished. Ta-da, there we go, and it runs. Woohoo! I mean, personally, I probably would still include some kind of is true or equals true or something like that, just to make it a bit clearer. But the point is you don't have to, right? And we can see whether or not they're a draw. So the home team won 6 times, it was a draw twice, and there's 2 times that the away team won, and so on and so forth. So, so we've got our Boolean values like that. And see someone saying, can we do home win without is true? Unfortunately, with the PL/SQL functions at the moment, that doesn't work, but you can do it with the columns, right? So you can do it with the columns, but not with our PL/SQL functions as it stands right now. Okay, so we've got our function to find out who won. We might also want to see what the goal difference is. So we've got a function and we want to get the absolute score difference. right? So we want to do the abs of the score difference, and we'll create that function. And we want to find all the games where there was a large score difference, where the total difference was greater than 3 or more. We can see there's one game where that happened. And at this point, a lot of DBAs, if you're a developer and you wrote this query and sent it to your DBA, they'll probably lose their mind and kind of say, what's going on here? You know, you're using PL SQL in the where clause, breaks function, breaks indexes, context switches. Go and sit in a corner, think about what you've done, right? Don't do this ever, right? And we can see, if we look at the plan, you can see the function goal diff is in the filter predicates. So this was something, for a whole bunch of reasons, that was strongly discouraged, shall we say, using PL SQL functions in SQL. SQL and PL SQL languages have different runtime engines, so there was context switching going on. And PL SQL functions also make it harder for the optimizer to know what's really going on here. 23C, we have addressed this with something called the SQL transpiler. And what this can do is automatically convert SQL expressions in PL SQL functions to SQL expressions. How do we do it? Well, we just set this transpiler equals on. You say faster equals true. I know people like to joke about there's no such thing as a faster equals true parameter, and these things don't exist. If you've got PL SQL that calls PL SQL and you meet the requirements, this is probably as close as you're going to get to a faster equals true parameter. So we've enabled that. If we look at the plan now, thing you need to look very carefully here. This filter has changed from, that's not what I want to show. I wanted to, from the goal difference to the absolute goal difference. Hang on, let me just put that back to off again. Let's just switch that back to off. We'll get the original plan. Let's just pin that. Let's just put this back to on. And that should work. There we go. There we go. So we got that absolute goal difference. Hopefully you can see we've changed. The expression has been taken out of the PL SQL function and placed directly in SQL. So we've done that conversion for you. So we've now got the ability to have these reusable logical functions without the performance. We get the performance of pure SQL with the reuse of PL SQL. Very, very cool, very neat, nice feature. Something I'm really happy about. I'm really like to see this. It is worth noting, however, as things stand at the moment, this is version 1 of the feature. There are a lot of restrictions. So it will only transpile things, pure functions. So basically they do one thing, they've got no PL SQL in them at all, and no SQL statements. So if I just stick this little thing in here, %row type is a PL SQL only feature, right? This just doesn't exist in SQL. So if I change the function to do that, that will disable the transpiler because this is a PL SQL construct, okay? So this is something we're working on. We're going to work on reduce these restrictions as much as possible. But as things stand at the moment, it's just pure functions that with no PL SQL and no SQL statements in them. Meet those requirements. It's super easy to actually get up and running with these. Right, finish up. We're nearly done with the demo here. Okay, and we talked a bit about our reporting user, right? We wanted to run some queries and have our low privilege user to do that. In the past, what you'd have to do is go through and grant, select, or read on all the individual tables. 23C, you've now got the ability to do read on a schema. So we're giving our reporting user access to query all the tables in League Owner. So let's just do that. And if I bring this up over here, I'll just pop that in so we can see what's going on here. It is our reporting user now has access to the games table, but the players table does not exist. Okay, so we currently don't have it. We're getting an error because it's just not there. I haven't created that yet. So this grants you access not only onto the current tables, but all future tables. Okay, so just to kind of show that again, just going to verify players doesn't exist. We're going to get an error. But if we then create the players table in the League Owner schema and then rerun this, voila, it works, right? So we've got a simple way to grant access for another user, one user access to all of another user's objects. Very useful for things, like I say, reporting users and things like that, where they typically need to query every single table in a schema. Alrighty then. So that was the demo. That was the demo over. I can see there's some comments and questions that have come in. This is a good point to ask your questions. I'll address some of these. I'm also going to run a short poll. And so what one went at the start, we looked at various things that were in 23C. So JSON relational duality, SQL PGQ, domains, and so on. Just having a quick poll, let us know which of those things you would like more in-depth follow-up sessions on, things that you would like to know about. While that poll's also running, please also just start typing your questions about what we've covered or any other questions you've got about 23C that are coming up. So question, when to expect 23C on cloud? So the full release of 23C is expected sometime in the coming year, and it will be coming on the cloud first. So timescales for that are not fixed exactly, but they are coming later this year. Should see that later this year. Okay, the covered is the Windows. For table values constructors, what is the maximum number of records we can add using this? Honestly, I don't know. I'm sure there probably is some practical limit of some thousands of values. It should be in the documentation, but I don't actually know off the top of my head. I'll have to check them up. Is there a way to have these scripts? I haven't shared them at the moment, but as things progress, I'll look at finding a way we can actually share these. So do Boolean values are able to represent 3-value logic? Can they take true, false, and also unknown? There is not a specific unknown value. It's just null, okay? Null is unknown in this context. I know that's not quite strictly right from a pure relational perspective, but that's how it's working here, okay? Grant read any table. How's it different from select any table that we already have? So select any table gives you the ability to query any table in any schema, right? It allows you to query every single table in the entire database. So read any table on schema allows you to only query the tables in that user. So select any table is the entire database. Select any table on schema is any table in a specific user/schema. So it is scoped to that particular user. So big difference there is kind of you're not giving them free reign to be able to query dictionary views and all that kind of stuff as well, things like that. All right. Domain with multiple columns, that's something we'll have to address in a future thing. Will these features get into 19C at some point? Some of them, maybe. It depends. Not all of them are possible to backport, but where it's possible, maybe, right? But we can look at that. All right, well, see, there's loads of questions. So let's just finish the poll up, and then we'll come up to some of these other questions. So we'll end the poll. Just kind of share the results so you can see them. There's a pretty even split about what people are interested in, actually, which I guess that's kind of a good thing. It's good that you've all got different things showing that there's all sorts of stuff that you want to see and learn about what's going on and what's happening here. I'll cover off a few kind of common questions and then spend a bit more time on some of the questions that are coming in the chat and Q&A. So first, big one as well, is 23C a long-term release? So for those who've not familiar, we now classify releases in two ways. 19C is our current long-term release, and 21C is our current innovation release. So long-term releases have many, many, many years worth of support, right? Whereas innovation releases have a much shorter support window, okay? So 23C is the current long-term release. If you are currently on 19C, which I hope most of you are on 19C, maybe some of you have been brave, made the jump to 21C already, but we expect most of you to be on 19C and upgrade straight to 23C, because that is the long-term release that will give you support for the coming years and in the future. So keep that in mind, think about that as part of your upgrade strategy. Next thing is, we talked about 21.3, getting myself all muddled and mixed up here, right? 20C3 free in production, right? So as I said, this is under the free to use terms and conditions. You are able to use it for whatever you want, right? As you know, you can use it however you want. The really important thing to note about this, the 20C3 free, is there will be no patches issued to it for it of any kind whatsoever, right? There are going to be no patches whatsoever. There will be a new version of it released when 23C goes full GA, when the full release is out later this year. At that point, if you are using the developer release, if you want to migrate to the new 23C free release, you'll have to export and import. You will not be able to patch. So think very carefully about whether you really want to have a system in production running that you cannot apply any patches to whatsoever. Personally, I'm not sure I'd want to do that. Right, okay. But like I say, it's up to you to use whatever you want. I say there's lots of other things coming in. One of the things is we talked a bit about the developer release coming out to help you kind of see what's coming, get familiar with it ahead of the full release, and kind of get up to speed and learn what's coming here. But another reason is we here at Oracle, we want to know what you think about this. We want to make sure this release actually delivers the functions, the capabilities that you want. So please, if you've got any questions, comments, you find any issues with it, go to the forum and send us your feedback. Send us any issues that you want. There is still a kind of small window. There is still a kind of window available where we can change some of this functionality at least a little bit, right? Between now and full GA. There won't be like major rewrites probably, but we can address some issues. So do send us your comments, send us your questions. If anything's not clear, please go to the forum and send us your thoughts and comments. We really want to hear from you so we can really make this a product that you really want to use and delivers the features that you want and the functionality that you need to build applications. Just a reminder, they say to get it, you just go to the download page, oracle.com/23C free. And you can access and get up and running, download it, run away with it, do what you want with it. So please go ahead and do that, get up and running. As I said, there is the RPM, there is a Docker image, and there is the VirtualBox image as well. So if you're running those, so check those out. Just follow up with some questions. I'll leave this slide on here. I can see there's tons of questions coming in, which is great. So I'll spend some time addressing those while we've got a little bit of time to finish up with. Okay. So can we expect a version for Apple? So I don't know if there's going to be, I don't know about a native Apple version, but you can get those Docker images or those and actually run those there. Okay, so you can use those Docker images should you need to. Table values constructors, we've addressed that. Let me go see. Will these features get into 19C? Like I said, I don't know. Some of them maybe, but most of them probably not. Well, that was something we'll have to assess on customer demand. A question about the Boolean field. How is it in create in a table statement regarding the data type? You just do create table column Boolean, right? It's called Boolean, right? So you just do like create table and Boolean like that, okay? Just like a regular data type. What's the difference between using the SQL transpiler feature and a scalar SQL macro? So that's a very good question. So SQL scalar macros are something that came in 21C and does a very similar function or functionality in that it takes SQL expressions and converts them directly into SQL, right? So I think the big difference between them is that the transpiler, you just enable and disable via parameter. That's it. You don't need to do anything. Whereas SQL macros, you actually have to change your function. You have to add the SQL macro clause and change how it's actually written. So that's the big overarching difference. Over time, as I think as things stand at the moment, there are things you can do in a macro that the transpiler won't do, right? We saw if you've got scalar subquery, so you're doing, select a single row to do a lookup of a value, right? The transpiler won't do that currently. Say, hopefully in the future, these are restrictions that will go away, but currently it won't. You can do that with a SQL macro. But over time, the need for a SQL macro it won't entirely go away. There are a couple of niche use cases which there are things you can't do directly in PL SQL. So for a function that just returns aggregates, so just return count star, for example, you can't return count star in PL SQL. That's nonsense. But you can return count star in a macro. So there will be some use cases for macros in the future, but not many over time. Any Docker image? Yes, there is Docker image available for 23C3. Please check that out. You see we've got the container registry. You can go and download that there. DBA should be happy now, yes. Does the select schema, can we apply to views in that schema? So the select that read, it's all the standard privileges you've got. So views, you actually only need the privileges on the underlying tables anyway. So if you've got read only table, that should just work. But you can do execute any procedure, that kind of thing as well. So it's any object level privileges can be applied to the whole schema. Okay, so whatever they are, select, insert, update, delete, execute, for all the types where that is relevant. Okay. Do you have select, insert, and delete in schema? Next question. Yes. Yeah, all these privileges work, right? Does the grant read any table also cover view sequence? So they say covered views, sequences, I think have their own privileges, but I would have to check. Is it possible to create updatable duality view in 23C? Yes. Duality views are a big topic. I think that's a session in its own right. So that's something for another day if you've got questions about those. So we can come back to that. Is 23C3 the same as 23XE? Not exactly. So Express Edition was our previous kind of freely available version of the database available. It's 23C3 essentially replaces XE, and it is very, very similar. We are aiming to offer a bit more functionality than XE offered, but principally free is a replacement for XE. Okay, that's a way to think about it. Okay, is partitioning in 23C3? Yes. So another thing I didn't mention is that the free release includes the vast majority of the options and packs available, right? So, partitioning, advanced compression, advanced analytics, all those kinds of things are in 20C3, in free. Like I say, it's not quite everything. I say it doesn't include rack, and it doesn't include other kind of high availability features, but the vast majority of developer related options and packs are in 20C3 free. Tripping over myself saying that. Okay, slide already answered. Can you share domain between schemas? Yes, you can share domains between schemas. I see Ettore coming on. I'll see if there's any last comment, any other interesting stuff. I don't think, I think there's still some other questions, but I think we need to kind of
we are going to wrap up, Chris. Chris, thank you. Literally, it was an incredible hour on Oracle Database 23C free developer release. There are still questions. I'm going to collect everything. Again, the invite is to join or the forum and submit there, because it's the place to have a conversation ongoing, or the Slack channel. Okay. And considering the result of the poll we had, we are going to have a series of session
Yeah.
to explode and go drill down in each of the future. Okay, so thank you everybody to join us, and thank you, Chris. See you next time. Bye.